ends up doubling or quadrupling the effect of an image. And we can identify, what that is in terms of dusk. But also what I've discovered is that if you go somewhere that isn't that great, it could actually look really good at the right time. So I've done a number of dusk shots where there has been not anything terribly spectacular if I took it in the daytime. And I have an example shot I'll show you in a sec. But it has made a huge difference when I go there at the right time, okay? So I suppose what I want to really do is give you a clue as to when this is. So for the longest of times, I would take photographs at nighttime. Nighttime's kind of easy, it lasts all night. Don't have to be in any particular place at any particular time. And I found that in the journey through my own photography, that what I was doing was I was taking a photograph when I just happened to be there. Grab a shot, and then not really fully understand why that wasn't great. So in the 5-minute window, that's when I take the shot, off you go. So night's kind of good in that way, in that you can be that lackadaisical, because once something's lit at nighttime, it looks great, and you've got all night to do it. The thing about dusk is that it only lasts a short time. So right here, and this is how I found out, I'm going to give you a clue as to roughly when that window is. So in Wichita tonight, I'm estimating that the blue moment, which is what I call it, will be at 21:19. Now let me show you visually what that might look like. A big part of the journey to taking consistently good photographs is to actually go out with the intention of just taking one. Now, this seems kind of counterintuitive. If I only take one, what if that's not a great shot? Except what you're doing is you're waiting for the right time. It's moving away from a general response that I call the scattergun approach to photography, or as I've heard it referred to as well, the pray and spray, right? If I take enough, I just might get lucky. One or two of those shots is going to work out, okay? So here's a number of shots I've taken that are shots that I've gone explicitly to the location ahead of time in the hope that I just get one. But if I get it, then it's going to be spectacular, okay? So this particular shot here, and I'll leave up the settings here. I'm using Lightroom here, so you get an idea of the settings up here. This is an ultra wide angle lens, 14 millimeters, and it is on a cropped sensor camera, happened to be a Nikon. So that 14 millimeters is what we call ultra wide. So Canon's crop sensors, the T3s, Rick was talking about earlier, the Nikons and so on, they have a crop sensor, a crop factor of 1.5. So if you think of 18 millimeters as the standard lens, 14 is wider. So that means in this particular case, I'm getting more of the foreground of, this is the Duomo in Florence, Firenze. So essentially what I'm doing is I've turned up, camera's ready to go. I'm going to talk about tripod and tripod techniques, but low shutter speeds mean tripod. So I bring a tripod with me, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a sec as well. I bring a tripod every time I go on vacation. And I don't care how many pairs of underwear I need to leave behind. The tripod makes sure I get something that I will remember. And I never remember how many pairs of underwear I brought with me. Doesn't matter, I have enough. So in terms of this particular shot, I'm going to call out the EXIF data. And the EXIF data tells me that I have started this first shot at 2019. So 19 minutes after 8 p.m. 2019. So my standard procedure is to kind of get there around sunset. And I figure I've got about a half hour. And I go back and talk about how I calculate where the right time might be. Okay. So I had literally traveled up the spine of Italy to get this one night before I fly back to Ireland. And then this blooming trash truck is in front. I'm going, this is Italy. He could park there all night. I don't know. So I'm getting really nervous at this stage. He's there 2 minutes later. He's still there a minute after that. And then he's gone. And they go, whew. So I wasn't sure. That's part of the problem. Now, if you look at the top of the dome, you'll see that it's getting warmer. But also look at the blue in the sky. So we started at 2018. Now we're at 2037. So we are 20 minutes after I started. In this particular case, I was really worried because I thought the cathedral would be lit up, but it's not. But in actual fact, I'm getting between that shot and then the next shot, the street lights have come on and they're beginning to light that up. And they give a lovely warm feel to it. So here we are at 2041, 2042. I'm trying to fire the flash because I'm really worried. And I naively think I can light up a big medieval cathedral with a single flash gun. Doesn't work. But just look at that blue sky. Now, these are just some shots I took. I'm going to talk about those in terms of flash effects that you can get later. And that to me is the shot. This is 2048. Okay. So basically this is a half hour after I arrived. Now, if I continue shooting, what you'll see is I shoot through and into the night. I've just moved the camera a little bit there. So then you start getting that inky blue and eventually becomes black. I want to show you another sequence here. This is in Valencia in Spain. And I've seen this previously through an internet search on Flickr, and I was blown away by it. So I decide, same theory, figure out when the blue moment is going to be, and then I arrive about a half hour beforehand to set up. So camera's all set up, tripod's all set up, and I'm testing out. So one of the things I'm testing out is I want to know what's likely to happen. I want to get the composition right, and I want to make sure that the lighting is going to work in my favor, or at the very least, remove lights if possible that work against me. So this is 2021, as it happens, first shot. And 10 minutes later, the lights inside the hemisphere are coming on, and you're seeing those reflections there. So 2021, this is 2040 now, and I begin to spot something I could not have seen beforehand, that a street light is in danger of flaring off to the side and drawing attention away from where I want to go. So a little movement of the camera means that I can now remove that as a potential distraction. So the thing about imagery of any kind is that the human eye will go to color first and contrast second, regardless of whether you want the eye to go there or not. So that light was in danger of giving me a contrast and a color that is not where I wanted the eye to go to, because the action is essentially around the hemisphere and hopefully a reflection I might get, and also then this other building behind. So I lined everything up. It's getting very windy at this point, and I'm getting quite scared. And what I'm scared about is that I may not get the reflections that I want, mirror reflections. So here, if you can just spot that there, I have a 1.6 second shutter speed, because that kind of shutter speed is likely to blur this water for me so that it's not just choppy, because choppy water tends not to be terribly interesting. So, you know, mirror-like effects are great, but choppy water isn't. So the wind is coming up and down, and I've moved the camera a little bit here now because as I was unable to see there and can clearly see here is that there's some lovely detail that when the water stops being blown about by the wind, I'm seeing some lovely tile detail below that's giving a nice texture into the foreground and filling that up. So remember, we started at 2021. We're now at 2047, 2048, and 2052. And then I get the shot. But if I continue, I end up just at nighttime. So that's the money shot. And I was lucky in terms of the wind. It had died down enough. Even at 6 seconds, because the light's getting lower, I need a longer shutter speed. So I go, in fact, I happen to be staying about an hour and a half away from Valencia at that time. So I get into the car and we're on vacation in southern Spain, and I drive. So it's an hour and a half there and it's an hour and a half back, and I'm there just to get one shot. But that took me a long time to get to that point, to think that I needed to put that investment, that I was willing to put that investment to get one shot. But I figured that it's hard to get great shots. And if I'm going to be randomly shooting, then I'll be less lucky in that regard. But also, dusk photography is something that I particularly liked. Okay. So how do I know when I'm likely to get the shot? The key is the end of civil twilight. So if we look at sunset tonight is 2048 in Wichita. And civil twilight, so there's 3 twilights. There's an astronomical twilight, a nautical twilight, and civil twilight. Civil twilight is what we call the end of dusk. So it becomes night after the end of civil twilight. That's when you're officially supposed to have your lights on, for example. Okay, if a cop gives you a ticket for not having lights on, one minute before that, you have a case in court because it's not yet nighttime. So 21:19, which is roughly a half hour. So it varies. In wintertime, it's shorter, and in summertime, middle of summer, it tends to be a little bit longer. In Kansas, a little bit less than we have here. We will go from maybe 20 minutes in December, end of November into December, and in July, June, the solstice, it could be near 40 minutes because we're more northerly, and so we get a different effect. So that's the clue that I'm looking for. So what that means is that if I make sure I have all the bits that I need, and I'll talk about those as we go through. I don't want to be top heavy on the tech. I want to show you the effects first, and then talk about the important settings and some of the pieces of kit that are really, really vital to get those working. And by the way, if anybody has a question, please feel free to pop that raise hand thing just to stop me and ask. I'm happy to clarify. Now, if there's any financial questions, you might want to leave those till later, okay? Because it's not my area of expertise. So these are just various shots that I've taken, and I want to kind of give you some hindsight around those. There are a number of ways to double up on the effect of any image. Quite literally, water. So if I'm looking to really take a shot and make it a wow shot, if there's a tidal river involved, which this is here, this is the River Liffey in Dublin, which opens out on the east coast into the bay, Dublin Bay, which is opens into the Irish Sea, and the Irish Sea is what separates us from Wales in England. So I'm looking for a high tide with low wind at dusk. I'm not sure that the tidal effects of the Arkansas River is as strong by the time it gets to your neck of the woods. But if you were closer to the coast, then it most certainly would. So that's what I'm looking for. And in an image like this, what I'm getting is I'm getting that mirror effect, which is literally doubling. One of the things that I have a tendency to do, I wouldn't be unique in this, is that if there are reflections, then the composition changes. The reliance on rule of thirds is no longer as important because you really want your horizon line. And when there is no horizon to be seen, essentially we determine the horizon as where the verticals meet the horizontal. So where the buildings meet the ground, where the mountain meets the bottom of the mountain, the ground at the bottom of the mountain, where the trees meet the ground. We define that as being the horizon. So in this particular shot, that horizon is smack bang in the middle because of the mirror effect that I'm getting on the water. Same here. In fact, these two shots were taken on the same night. They were taken around that solstice in June. Let me just see the difference in time between these. That was 22:47, which is just about ideal for that. And this was 23:12. So it's kind of a good 20 minutes later, and I'm still getting some blue in that sky. And I would not normally continue shooting because once you get the shot, then anything after that is less effective. And certainly if you have to travel quite a distance. But as I say, in this case, in the summertime, in fact, there can still be light in the sky in Ireland in mid-June up until midnight. So same again, mirror reflections. So I'm keeping an eye out for these things that once I've identified a potential shot, I will then keep an eye on if is there water involved? Well, then I want to keep an eye for as little wind as possible. Now I know that's a challenge in Kansas. Okay, so I get that. It's not that I necessarily won't go out if it's windy, but I'll just be mindful of what those conditions are likely to give me. And I will talk about some techniques around wind and what it does to tripods, cameras on tripods and so on as well. So that's the shot in Valencia that I mentioned earlier. And this one here now uses a kind of slightly different technique. So one of the things I suppose I'd like to leave you with is kind of a series of settings that are likely to give you a reasonably good dusk shot, depending on what's going on inside in terms of is there movement or not, okay? So there is movement in that shot, and I'm kind of just going to show you some kind of standard settings. In fact, these are the settings that I used on a shot that I took at the Fox Theatre in Hutch. I'm using aperture priority. Let me just go here. There we go. If we have a look here, this is just a kind of generic rear screen effect. I'm using aperture priority. So AV on Canons, A on most of the cameras. I am deciding the aperture. Now the aperture is something that I will play around with. In general, we seek to find an aperture of around f11 for maximum sharpness with any lens. Okay, it gives us a mix between sharpness and depth of field. I tend to be shooting wide and ultra wide, so the depth of field is less of an issue. And I'm shooting buildings which are relatively far away from the camera, so depth of field is less of an issue. I'm rarely trying to get something close to the camera and something far away at once. So the aperture is less of a concern. But what is important to me is what the shutter speed that comes out of that. You'll notice here that I've got the ISO down at 100. So that happens to be the bottom ISO number in most cameras. Some older cameras, maybe 200 was the lower. I know certainly some of my early Nikon digital SLRs only went to 200. Some will go lower than that. But essentially, the best quality that you're going to achieve in an image in terms of the noise, the color and black speckles that we can get is going to come when you have a low number, okay? So I will then move the aperture number, the f-stop, to get the shutter speed that I want, okay? And essentially what happens is that in aperture priority, with the ISO locked off, not on any auto. So see, the camera thinks that you're handheld. Oftentimes, even if you're on a tripod, the camera response in any of the auto or semi-auto modes is the camera's trying to get the shutter speed high to prevent camera shake. And many cameras don't know that it's on a tripod and still think it's handheld and it's trying to get the shutter speed higher. And it will do that if the ISO is on auto by allowing that ISO number to go really high and bring in numbers that you don't want. Okay, so lock off the ISO, aperture priority, move the aperture number, and what will happen then is as you move that, the shutter speed will change. So in this shot, I've identified a number, a shutter speed that I want. It's important to say as well that as the light level drops, the shutter speed will increase anyway. So at the start, at f16 or f11 of my sequence, which is kind of around sunset, I'm not going to get the shutter speed that I will get a half hour later, because as the light level drops, the shutter speed has to go longer to allow more of that low light in to give a correct exposure. So in terms of the shutter speeds that I'm generally looking for in dusk shots. So fundamentally, if there is no movement in your shot, then the shutter speed does not matter. Okay? Mm-hmm. We're generally using wide angle or ultra wide angle lenses, so depth of field is generally not an issue. In other words, I can use almost any aperture number I want to get the result if the shutter speed matters. So my baseline is, if there's no movement, f11, 100 ISO, and whatever the shutter speed is, doesn't matter. Okay? Where there is movement, then I have to identify the kind of movement. And fundamentally, we're talking about people walking around or vehicles moving through the shot. Mm-hmm. After about 2 seconds or so, moving people will disappear out of a photo. So if you look back at photos taken in the kind of mid-Victorian times as photography is coming on as a new thing, shutter speeds were in excess of a minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes. And so oftentimes why in the very early days of photography, why you don't see anybody in shots in the middle of a very busy city is that nobody stayed still long enough to record in a 10-minute exposure. They just disappear. So in this particular case, this is the brain dead, Hadrian Rotunda. In Rome, the Piazza della Rotonda, and people are standing around. So I can get away with 20 seconds because they are staying long enough. They're sitting. And you can see this person, these two people here are talking, and they've swayed top and bottom. So we're seeing their feet. And then some people are walking a little bit here. Then the other number that I'm looking for, and here's a shot of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. And this is a 13-second shutter speed. I have a series of light trails. Yeah, let me show you those. There we go. Okay. So Kansas City, MO, Plaza, 6 seconds. 8 seconds. This is in Dublin. 10 seconds. There's one of the shots I have of the Lincoln Memorial, 10 seconds. Medieval Church, Christchurch in Dublin, 10 seconds. This is a roundabout in Hutchinson, 8 seconds. Another Christchurch one. I'm getting away with 4 seconds here, and I'll talk about why there's a difference here. Westminster Bridge in London, 8 seconds. Paris, 8 seconds. Now, there's a little bit of a lie in the shot, and I'm going to go back to it in a bit. then 15 seconds. So the reason I'm showing you those is the calculation for the shutter speed when there are vehicles, light trails going through, is actually the length of time it takes one vehicle to go all the way through the shot. So the reason why, for example, I have this shot here at 15 seconds is that that's kind of how long it takes for a car to go through most of that scene. And the reason I am getting away with a slower shutter speed in this one is to do with the fact that the vehicle doesn't have as much physical distance to travel through the shot. And that's also based on another photography thing, which is that the shutter speed that freezes or blurs action is actually defined by two things. It's defined by the speed of the action itself. How fast is it going? How slow is it going? But it's also secondarily defined by its distance from you. So in the highway shot, those cars are going way off into the distance and they're hardly moving relative to my position far off. Whereas in this shot here, this is a bus, by the way, and these are the lights. It's a double-decker bus, so this is the upper deck of the bus. I am right beside that bus just before it enters the shot, and it only has to travel to here to work for me. So 4 seconds is enough. And in that shot, I get 4 seconds at f11. I'm at f8 and I get 8 seconds, a little bit later in the evening, but I have a longer journey for those vehicles to go through. I'm waiting. These are multiple cars here, because they're all waiting at traffic lights, stoplights. And then this one here, there are overlays, and you can see there's a car had come in and stopped. Well, not stopped. The shutter speed closes, and that ends there. And another one I picked up just starting there. So I'm getting overlays of different cars, and that's also true on this side as well. Getting an overlay of cars coming, going. So I'm not necessarily getting one trail all the way through. There's enough of them. The highway is busy enough that I can actually get that to work. So if the movement is closer to me, then I can use a slower shutter speed. If the movement is further away from me, then I need a longer shutter speed. So one of those ones I showed here, which was a little bit longer, here is a 10-second shutter speed. And this one here is calculated based on a single bus, how long it takes to go through my scene. And to make sure I get as much light into the scene as possible, I fire just before the vehicle or vehicles come in, unless like a highway, they're going all the time. Although sometimes you'd be amazed. You stand up on a busy highway at night to take a photograph and then suddenly there's no cars for about 5 minutes. You go, what? But generally on a highway, busy highway, you don't have to worry too much about that. But in a city center, maybe traffic lights will stop, stoplights will stop traffic, and then you have to wait for them to come in. But I want this light trail to be going all the way through my shot and around the corner. So that's one bus. The white is the lights, the kind of interior lights coming through the upper deck, which I begin to lose as it turns away from me. But the red then are the tail lights of the vehicle at the top. So I'm always looking for taller buildings if I can, or taller vehicles, because I can get some lights up, not just the tail lights of a car, because they're going to be hugging the ground quite a lot, because that's, they're only 2 feet off the ground. Okay. In Kansas City, when I took the shot in the plaza, I had a major issue, because you guys don't have many buses. One of the things I can almost guarantee in any European city I go to is that I don't have to wait very long before a bus comes along.
Yeah.
And even if it's only a single deck bus, you know, it's higher up and it has taillights that are at the top, so I can get something up the top. So in this particular shot, I was waiting. And as you can see from the dark blue, it's getting a bit late. And there hasn't been a single blooming bus come through at all. And I do this, and this is not a word of a lie. Right? I have a quick release plate. So there I am looking at the plaza. I do this, and I'm about to go, and I see a bus coming. Oh, didn't touch any settings. Fire, and I get the bus. And this is a single, so it's just a normal single deck bus that they use in Kansas City. But I'm getting two lovely sets of lights. I'm getting the lights coming through the windows, and then I'm getting those tail lights at the very top of the vehicle as well. And what I also get then is I get some nice light trails of cars that are turning and going through as well. So in general, on a busy intersection like that, where the scene is deeper, I'm looking at 6 seconds as a starting point. So in general, I'm going to go into aperture priority mode. I'm going to have 100 ISO on, and I'm going to change the aperture until I get the shutter speed that I need. In this case, it's f9 that gave it to me. And the f9 is somewhat irrelevant because really I'm using the aperture to get the shutter. Okay. Now you could certainly use other modes to get there. There's no two ways about it. You can use program mode if you wish to do that. And every camera has a variation of a program shift that you move a dial, and the shutter speed and aperture combination which the camera gives you, you can adjust. Many cameras though will lose that once the camera goes asleep, and then you're going to go back and do it again. Whereas with the semi-auto modes or manual modes, I can leave it there exactly. Now, I mentioned manual mode. Why do I not use manual mode? Manual mode is not a good idea, generally, in a situation where the light is changing. Manual mode leaves you in full control. You're an adult, right? You're 21, you can drink, right? And so you've got to keep changing, and you may forget to change. And the LCDs on the back of the cameras can fool you. It looks kind of bright because it's now dark. But in actual fact, you could end up with an underexposure by a stop or two stops, which means you've got to brighten it up quite a bit. And when you brighten a shot, you actually bring extra noise. So if you, anytime you have to lift up those shadows in any way, even at 100 or 200 ISO, you're going to increase the noise, because that's what happens to the noise, signal to noise ratio. You're basically increasing it. Now I could go shutter priority, of course. If I know the shutter speed I want, could I not just do that? And you know, the quick answer is yes, absolutely, if I know it's 6 seconds. But if the shutter speed I want, or I ideally would like, is at the edge of the ability of shutter priority to give me an aperture to balance out, I can go and shoot that shutter speed, but it may not be giving a correct exposure based on the aperture. Less of an issue at around the blue moment, more of an issue as the light level drops. So sometimes you're too caught up in the scene. I really don't want to be too caught up in the technical when I'm trying to be creative. I just found that you can only be one or the other. So if you're caught staring at the camera because you're trying to figure out something that's not working, well then I could have missed the bus, for example, in this particular shot. So I just find that I want to lock off the technical and maybe make some minor changes, like I want to change the shutter speed because I know the movement that I want to capture. And that's really all I'm worrying about. because then my whole brain is free to think in terms of the scene itself. Okay. On that, are there any questions so far? Does anybody want to ask about how your camera responds in those situations? There's a very good chance that you Kansans haven't understood a single word out of my Irish accent in the last while. I don't know. You're all too kind, so you don't say anything. Okay, so what I'd like to do then is maybe just talk to you about how I set the camera up itself and some of the things that I'm looking to do. And I know that some of you have mirrorless cameras and some of you have SLRs, and there's one subtle difference between using the two of those cameras at night that I'd like to explain as well. Okay. So we'll talk about the buttons on the outside first, and then we'll talk about some settings on the inside that I want you to be mindful of. When we are shooting from a tripod, then any anti-shake that's on a camera, it's called IS on Canons, it's called VR on Nikons, super steady shot, I think Sony may call it. This is a vibration that goes on somewhere inside the camera. With Nikons and Canons, for sure, it's in the lens. I think some of the new mirrorless come out are utilizing what they call IBIS, which is in-body image stabilization. Jerry, your Olympus has, it basically moves its sensor. So it vibrates the sensor to get over that. So that's meant for handheld photography. The danger with tripod photography, and this is true of any tripod photography, by the way, not just Dusk photography, landscape photography, if you're shooting long lenses for birds, for example, as well. So the vibration that camera causes, if it's on a tripod, it's got nowhere to go. It goes down into the tripod itself and then comes back up and actually moves the camera just a little bit. So it doesn't give you an out of focus shot, but it could take away sharpness. And everything we're doing is designed more or less to get sharp shots. So we want to make sure that we don't remove something that is going to take away that sharpness that we've paid a good money on a lens to get, for example. We want that, okay? But handheld photography, definitely I want it on. So it doesn't matter whether I'm shooting street photography or whether I'm shooting family shots. So off tripod and on when it is handheld. Generally, I will leave autofocus. Some cameras will have an autofocus button here, or the autofocus buttons might be inside. So I'll keep those on. There is an advanced way that you can use with depth field preview, but I'm actually really quite happy to use autofocus. In general, and I'm just showing you what this looks like on a Canon, and you will need to translate for yourself in your own camera model itself. So in general, what we're looking to do is to identify where the focus points are operating and how they work within our scene, within the scene that we're shooting. So in here, in this particular camera, I have 9 focus points, of which I can choose one. Some cameras are more sophisticated. They may allow you, in other words, I can choose all or one. Some cameras will allow you to choose a grouping. So you've all, one, a grouping, and that grouping may be able to shift. So in general terms, what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to follow the rule of thirds. So I'm generally looking for a focus point somewhere down the bottom. That's 1/3 up into the scene. And that's because most of the images that I want to shoot are going to have something in that bottom area that I will want to lock onto. And I might want to be careful that I don't accidentally lock on to a street lamp, for example. I may want to make sure that I don't do that. So this lets me choose where I focus. Now, oftentimes in the city, when you're certainly in a medieval city like Dublin, there isn't much off in the distance because everything is jam-packed up against itself. Rick, I'm sure that was one of the probably big features you noticed when you went to Germany, is how close everything is and how big everything is within that small space. So as long as I can lock on to a building. Now the focus can be an issue. So here would be an example of where I would want to move a focus point off to the right-hand side, because this is what I want in focus. I want to be sharp on that. The light trails are going to be blurred anyway, so I don't need to be sharp on those. And I certainly don't mind if the road is a little bit blurred, but it would be a big deal if Big Ben wasn't. So that would mean that in a shot like this, I will then seek to find a focus point that is over on the right-hand side. That's roughly where Big Ben is likely to be. The more focus points, the better. One of the big differences, there are probably two fundamental differences between new cameras and old cameras, and that is the number of focus points and the height at which the ISO number will go to at good quality. Right, that's fundamental. If you are only ever using cameras in this way, I can use a camera that, in fact, I'm planning to take out my very first 2002 Sony f707. Planning to take it out. I fired it up the other night and fired up. It worked. The battery would take a charge. So I'm planning to use it because I know I can use it very close to the way I can use this camera here, which is multiple times better, but low ISO, slow shutter speeds, shouldn't have a major problem. So I'm looking forward to going back in time to see what that looked like. So they're the kind of settings that I'm looking for on the outside. And as I say, I want to make sure that I have the correct mode chosen, which is going to be AV on this particular Canon. And one other, well, two things, I suppose, really. The ISO. Okay, so in this camera here, my button for the ISO is on the outside. It's an older camera. You can see it's only going to 1600 ISO. So I want to make sure that I choose 100 ISO. Now, one thing I do find crops up every now and then that people have a problem with, which is that make sure that you don't have any exposure compensation set. In this particular camera, I can choose to overexpose by holding a button down and go to the right, or underexpose by going to the left. In general, I like to be at 0. Sometimes, because of the bright lights, I might need to go to the plus side, but I want to make sure I'm starting off at 0 in the first place, so that I get what the camera thinks is a correct exposure. I may need to adjust that later on, and I can check that out by looking at the histogram, which I'll talk about in a sec. In this camera, I have it previously set for street photography, so I don't need to be shooting multiple shots. So I don't want continuous shooting, single shot. And I also don't want continuous focusing. So on this camera, it's called one shot. So it focuses, gives me a beep. I don't want continuous focusing, which Canon call AI servo. And I don't want AI focus, which is a hybrid of the two. I really want just one shot. And basically that sounds like, I think you can hear, right. So once I hear that beep, I know I'm in focus. And at that point, what I'll often do is I'll go back around to the lens, focus, hear the beep, and gently go to manual focus. The reason for that is that if the camera, if I try to take a second shot and at that point a vehicle is coming into the scene, great. May not show in the scene because the shutter speed disappears it, but leaves its lights. But the camera may want to try to focus on that. And now suddenly, because it's low light, it may not even fire a shot because it's hunting for focus. I'm sure you've all got that where the camera is giving you some kind of feedback that you'll often, on older lenses, you'll hear them hunt going, it's seeking the focus in the low light that you're seeing, and it won't fire until it finds a focus. So you may actually miss a shot. So focusing first onto manual focus, but remembering that if I change the scene, if I move the camera, if I zoom in, if I zoom out, I need to go back to autofocus and then do a refocus on that, okay? Now, in general, what I try to do is I try to find the composition I want and leave it there, because there's magic I can do in Photoshop later that I'm going to talk about also within that. So that's really what's on the outside. I mentioned just a little earlier that there's a thing that is important in terms of SLRs, and I've mentioned about our goal of getting sharp, tack sharp shots. We want to keep everything away from the camera that is likely to give us an issue with that. With an SLR, the mirror is actually in the way of the sensor. It's at 45 degrees. And that mirror has to kick up. So it's a single lens reflex. The reflex is the mirror coming up out of the way. That slaps at the top of the camera. And in fact, that slap could move the camera a little bit. So for SLRs, and this would be the T3i, for example, all Nikon SLRs, mirrorless cameras are not an issue in this regard, and I'll explain why in a sec. So somewhere in the camera, there may, and entry-level cameras don't often have it, a mirror lockup function. And what the mirror lockup does is it allows you to fire the camera twice. So I'm going to enable this. And what this sounds like, first off, in fact, is like you are taking a photo. So I'm actually going to fire now. And you've heard it, like the shot's taken, and something's happening. Well, that first press just took the mirror up out of the way, gave the camera time to settle down, and then the second press fires the shot. So that slap is removed. It's not removed. It's separated from the act of taking the shot itself. And what that means is that when I use a cable release, then when I fire the first time, the mirror goes up. And so in terms of, say, the shot that you see behind, then the double-decker bus is coming over the bridge. And so I've pressed before it's come into the shot, and then just before it's in the shot, just before I hit my second press. And now the shutter's open, and I don't suffer from the slap and potential, not blur. Remember, it's important to say that it's just lack of sharpness that the resulting slap might give me, okay? So that's kind of hugely the settings that I'm looking for in the camera. The next stage, and this can also be where sharpness comes from, or lack of sharpness comes from. When I have my camera down on my tripod, I will do this. If there's any movement at all, and it could be because I have an aluminum tripod and that they're going to flex, so they're not great. So I want to make sure that everything about this camera is rock solid. And that includes the camera plate. I want to make sure that that camera plate doesn't rotate. I want to make sure the camera plate isn't at an angle. I use Manfrotto, and Manfrotto are great because they tell you where it should point. The lens should point that way. There is a lens that way, and that's designed for those that have bigger lenses where the camera wants to kind of fall down almost. So I make sure that that's tight, as tight as it can be. And in fact, what I do with all my cameras, and you'll see it on this camera here, is I buy extra plates and I leave them on the camera. Now, I'm not sure that putting them down on a mahogany table that you bought for $15,000 is the way to do that. But by doing that, I never forget, and I never have to worry about cold hands in the middle of winter trying to tighten that thing up. It's there. It's there when I need it, okay? So that's number one. Then I want to make sure that the tripod, the camera plate is tight to the tripod itself. And I also want to make sure that the tripod is fairly flat, don't want it at an angle, but also that the central column is tight, okay? So center column allows me to move that around if I want. If that's tight, if that's not tight, there's movement. So I want to make sure that anything that can be tightened is tightened. And at that point, when this doesn't want to rotate in any way, shape, or form, then we were saying here, I'm away in a hack being a two-wheeled carriage, horse and carriage. You're away in a hack. So mirror lockup, I've got all those settings, the 100 ISO. I've chosen the aperture number to give me the shutter speed that I want. White balance at auto is fine. I am shooting raw files, although you can shoot raw plus JPEG. I can get much more out of those later on if I want. I say with mirror lockup, I've chosen the focus point I want. I've got any anti-shake off. I'll focus, manual focus, and then wait. That's it. So the research really is about bringing you to that point. So I mentioned a little earlier that I try not to move the camera after I've set up. Now that was harder when I was starting out because I wasn't quite sure what my composition was going to be. And it was kind of a little bit scattered, going up, move a bit left, move a bit right. But over the years, I discovered that what I can do, and in fact, I did it here. This is California, and this is San Luis Obispo in the Central Coast. Voted one of the top 10 happiest towns, cities in America at one point. So you can see here that I actually have 0.3 seconds, yet I have light trails going all the way through. So something isn't quite right. Either that's a very, very fast moving series of vehicles going through, or it wasn't 0.3. We have to ask ourselves as to why is it 0.3? The reason it's 0.3 is that that's a blend of two shots. I have two kinds of movement going on here. I have people outside the cinema ready to go in. And a 6 second or an 8 second or a 12 second shutter speed is going to disappear them completely. They're just gone. So what I do, and I'm going to show you this in terms of the two shots. So I'm going to go to Folder and Library and show you the sequence of shots. That's not where that's meant to be. Okay. Now I'm going to open it up in Edit in Photoshop. Yes, please. I'll show it to you in the base level image that I shot. Yeah. Try again. Edit in Photoshop 2020. Edit original. Yes, please. Thought I asked that. Okay, bear with me for a sec. I'm now going to show in Finder. Show me where that shot is. There we go. Why don't you want to open? Ah, there we go. Okay. I find that the more people looking at you while you're doing something, technical with a computer, the more likely it is to fail. So too many people were watching. That was the problem. So here we have the blend. And how have I got this? I've got it because I took a number of different shots. In fact, it's a blend of 3. So my base underlying image is that 0.3 seconds. And then over that, what I've done is I have a number of different images going on. And this one here is the one that has the light trails. So this is at an f22, and I can tell that because of the flare that's going on in this particular light. And that gives me a shutter speed, which allows those vehicles, and I got a bus going through as well. So I have cars and I have a bus going through. But of course, people who are standing there, they've disappeared. Now, it was interesting that this person is sitting on that bench. So you can see them because there's maybe the hand is a bit blurred, but they're really not moving that much. And she was obviously standing for a while, taking the order from the people inside the restaurant. So I end up, and I'm just using masks to blend these together. I then end up with a mix of the two, with one being somewhere around 8 seconds, 8 to 10 seconds to get the light trails of the bus going all the way through, and then 0.3 to get. If I had moved the camera even a little bit between those two shots, lining them up would be almost impossible, and certainly would take an age. And somewhere something wouldn't quite line up. Some line and some vertical or horizontal wouldn't line up. So I established my composition first, and then I take the multiple shots depending on what it is that I'm looking to do. Does that make sense? That would have been much harder at the start because I wasn't sure what I want. And photography really is about repetition, right? It's one of those strange, it's a really strange beast. It's a mix of the technical and creative, but the technical will defeat the creative almost every single time, except there's one instance. I remember my tutor asking me in photography college. He said, Dave, he said, what do we call a blurred photo? He said, we call it art. So in general, we're not looking for a blurred photo. We're looking for a sharp photo, but that's a technical requirement. After that, once you have the technical, not so much kind of mastered per se, but that you're on top of it, then the creative can come in. And the most important thing here probably is the composition. You know, I certainly don't want to lose the top of the Fremont. I don't. I want to be out onto the road as I am. My tripod's just a little bit out on the road, and the cops would pull me in without a doubt, you know. So I've got one leg of the tripod out, and I'm keeping an eye behind me to make sure nobody hits me, you know, obviously. And that's allowing me to get a different perspective. So I'm fighting to get that part of it right first. There's one other image I want to show you, and it's kind of a little bit used in that particular image. And then we'll open up for some shots or some questions. I have a shot here I took, and no shot, no individual image I got of it. I'm going to do so many here. Christchurch, there we go. That's it. That's what I want. Okay. So this is that medieval cathedral. I actually live in an apartment. In fact, if I looked out my apartment window, I would see the top of the spire. So I'm right close to it. So what I have here is, if I was just taking a photograph of the church, shutter speed doesn't matter. But I want to get buses, as it happens. Again, these double-decker buses are going through. But when I took the shot at 13 seconds, the lights were blocking the church. Didn't look so nice. So let me show you what I did. Again, it was the same technique that I set up multiple, I set the tripod up, I get my composition right first, and I set up multiple, take multiple images. And so what I've actually done, in fact, is I have layered those. So I have a base image where I've got just cars going through. And then I have a number of shots where the lights were going all the way through. And what I did is I create a mask that allows me to paint out, because the tripod hasn't moved. It means that when I enable that mask, and I have some others going in, another mask going on there, I'm able to paint through the light trails to reveal the tower of the church underneath, untouched by those light trails. So again, establishing the composition, understanding already that I'm going to need a blend. So I look for a base shot that has nothing in the way of the church. And then, I'm on a wing and a prayer as to the kinds of traffic that might come through. So I'll take multiples of those around the same time if I can, because the light's falling. And I don't want to have to do too much work to try to balance those in the shot. So in the subsequent minutes is when or maybe afterwards, maybe if I've got a good light trail, then immediately switch and go to a slower shutter or faster shutter speed so that no cars come in or no buses come in. Take another photograph, and that's my base over which I put the other ones. So that's a bit more advanced in terms of the requirements afterwards, but it's how, quite literally, I'm able to get a shot that miraculously the light trails disappear at just the point I want them to disappear. There's actually nothing miraculous about it at all. So that's kind of a run through. I'm going to give you a little bit of a view of some of the images that I have, and I'll kind of have a quick, if I feel I need to talk about them, I'll talk about those, and then we'll open up for Q&A. This is a round tower, which was built under the British, and it's one of the defense, Martello Tower they call it, defense against Napoleon invading Europe or invading England and Ireland, because they ran us at that time. But I actually felt that when I set the shot up, the place was empty and it's all closed down because it's nighttime. I felt it just needed somebody in there. So I set the camera to a 10-second delay and I belted in to run up to be just at that point, and I moved a little bit. Okay. So it's a 4-second shutter speed, but it's a 10-second delay on that. And the reason I want that is that you don't know what size those towers are until you see a human being in there. So human beings give scale when they're in a shot. This one here, you can see 1/6 of a second, and that's because the people are moving quite fast. So I've got mostly their feet because they're planted and their bodies are blurred. People off in the distance are not as blurred because they're walking towards the camera and away from the camera. That's Lincoln Cathedral in the UK. This one here is another blend. You'll see that it's a 10-second. Well, the 10-second on this is for the water, and then the people are a much slower shutter speed. Camera hasn't moved, and I have blended the two together. This is a full shot, 8 seconds, no blends going on that. I always love light trails going around a corner. I think that works really, really well. In fact, what I'll do is I'll show you real quick. Is the Warren still open in Midtown? I got a lovely shot of it a few years ago. In this case here, so one of the problems with Kansas at nighttime is that not many people are driving around, particularly in the summertime. This is like quite late, 8:39. So what I did actually was I'd gone with a friend, and I got my friend to drive. That's her car. So I got her to drive around, got a lovely angle on the or curve, should I say, on the lights, which I always like. I think it's almost like you're painting when you do that. That's the Colosseum shot. 3.6 seconds is enough to get plenty of light trails in there. Not much movement going here. This is an 18-second shutter speed, more because it's very dark at that stage, and I'm just looking for the blue moment itself. And I mentioned earlier that you want to get a great shot, go to a great place. An Italian medieval hill town at dusk. You're not going wrong. 0.6 seconds here because there are people walking in the scene, and I want to get a little bit of blur off them. This one here is 1.1 seconds. This is quite interesting because you have the people here in the foreground who are walking at 1.1 seconds and are quite blurred, almost beginning to disappear. Yet people who are standing or sitting, who are not moving, then they stay in the shot. So what you're seeing here, a lot of these there's that, again, just mirror reflections. You just cannot beat them. Honest to goodness, you really can't. And what you're seeing here, this is, again, Valencia in Spain. This is Seville. And this, by the way, is the original of the species. Some people know this and some people don't. The tower in the plaza is a 50% replica of La Giralda, the tower in Seville in southern Spain. And if you look closely in, you'll see the detail is the same. It's just 50%. And it was only when I was searching about that tower. So none of those shots could be got without a tripod. And I now bring a tripod with me. It just, I don't care what it takes. It comes with me because I can't get those kinds of shots. So when I travel, oftentimes it's could be a bit harder now because they're charging a lot more for carry-on. I can't. Some flights let you take a tripod on, and some flights don't. So I will ring ahead to check and see what that is. If I'm popping over to the UK for a day, I want to make sure that I can bring a tripod in my carry-on because I'm only going for a day. I don't want to bring a big suitcase. It's only an hour flight from Dublin to London, so we can get an early flight out in the morning and spend the whole day in London, and then come back on the last flight at night and have the day there. So I'll sometimes do that as well. So that's really it. It's just, I wanted to give you the kind of technical background. I wanted to give you some of the visuals. I'm glad I thought to show you the Warren shot because I want to show you that those techniques work in America as well. They're not just European settings. You know, it's not quite like, you know, the wrenches, you know, and nuts and bolts is European and US, and they don't really quite go well together. So that's not the case here. So I'll open up for some Q&A because I think we said we were going to come in at 90 minutes, which is about 15 minutes away. Is that okay, Jack? Or Sam? Sorry.
Yeah, that sounds great. If you're you feel free to unmute yourself, folks, and ask a question or comment. And then those of you watching on Facebook Live, if there are any at this moment, feel free to type a question, and there's like a 20-second delay, and then I'll read Dave the question.
Sounds good to me.
I'd like to begin just by, Dave, expressing much appreciation for your presentation. And I'm in a circumstance right now where my air conditioning isn't working, and the serviceman just arrived, and he's beginning work on my air conditioner, but I got distracted and I had to step out for a little bit for that reason.
I think, Sam, you've recorded this, haven't you?
Yeah, on replay on our Facebook page, so you can go back and watch what you missed.
Oh, very, very good. Thank you very much. I'll also just share that, yeah, this is very informative. And just to share personally, I've been doing a lot of just nature photography near my home during that time before the sun rises, that the light is optimal. And so, yeah. So, and I've gotten just a half mile from my house, some wonderful shots recently of a heron, great blue heron in a very natural setting. And I've enjoyed that, but there are many technical aspects that you have highlighted in your presentation that I've made note of and that I will be looking at.
Because tripod-based photography, regardless of whether you're shooting in the daytime or at nighttime, a lot of the techniques are pretty much the same.
Very yes. So thank you again.
And in fact, thank you for this. Your mirrorless camera, of course, mirrorless cameras don't need that mirror lockup because they have no mirror.
Right.
So right. You don't have that issue. So you don't necessarily need to be worrying about the camera shake. But everything else about keeping the tripod sturdy is absolutely still valid.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that.
And I may leave a little early because I need to attend to what's happening here.
AC and 100-degree Fahrenheit. Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Absolutely get it. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Jerry. Anybody else? Questions? Anything at all?
I was kind of wondering, you know, I would wonder if you've ever taken shots where you get the, like if it's a windy day, I look out the window, the tree blur from tree shaking and incorporate that into a composition or something.
I absolutely do. Now, of course, it depends on the scene. And as Kansans, you're going to have much more access to tall grasses and things like that. So I'll show you. In fact, I deliberately used pretty much all of the techniques we've talked about on this particular shot. This shot here, again, it's the Arkansas River. So, you know, that's a Victorian convent. I'm sure you know. Kylemore Abbey in Connemara and the west coast of Ireland, in Galway. So you'll see that this is a 5-second shutter speed at f/22 at ISO 50. I was talking about ISO 100 earlier. My camera allows me to go to ISO 50. The lower the ISO number, the longer the shutter speed. Now, getting a slow shutter speed in the middle of the day, it was an overcast day, it's actually pretty tough. So I'm using everything in the camera between the low ISO number and the large aperture number, which is a physically small aperture. Okay, so that's the tiniest hole I can get. Both of those together are going to reduce the light down quite a bit, which means the camera in aperture priority mode has to give me a longer shutter speed. And that's chosen because of two things. One, these didn't look so well static as they do when they're blurred. So static was acting as a block through the shot, whereas the 5-second, which I would fire, I'd have the camera on the mirror lockup because I have an SLR. The mirror lockup is on, and then I fire just as the wind kicked in, and it wasn't terribly windy that day. So, you know, I was waiting for a bit, and then I was lucky. I think that particular one, I got a number of them. So that was a really good question, Sam. Thanks for asking that. So this was a case of where there was movement in the foreground, and I was seeking to remove it as being a block to the image, while also hoping that I could get something creative to add within the image without it being the dominant piece within that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Cool. And do you scope out? I mean, do you like just walk around cities and look for shots that you think would work at dusk, or do you walk around
Yes.
at dusk? Yeah.
Pretty much. I still am a huge fan of Flickr. Okay. Now, Flickr is not the beast that it used to be 4, 5, 6 years ago, because everybody went over to Facebook. But one of the great things about Flickr is that you can, so Flickr, FLICKR.com, you can actually go and search on a world map, and you can do a search. So if I search there and I just put dusk, then I can do a search and it will show me shots that have been tagged with the word dusk. So this particular shot has been taken in the UK. But here's the thing. If I actually know where I'm going to be, okay, so let's say I'm going to be near Marseille. Well, if I zoom in and do another search for dusk, it's only going to search that particular area. So then I can either click here if I think there's something interesting in the thumbnail, or I can click in the spot. That's the village that I'm staying in, say. Then it shows me that, hey, there's a lovely windmill to be found in that particular town. Over here by the water, it'll show me there's somebody's done some nice light trails. Down the road in Toulon, there looks like there is, in fact, if I click on it, I can then go through to that image. And sometimes people have given me, yep, Canon 6D, f7. So there's all the settings. Not every camera does that. So I find that to be a hugely helpful resource when I'm in a place that I don't know ahead of time. My second port of call is, particularly if it's in a touristy city, look at the postcard stands, because the local photographers have not only taken photographs of the interesting visual things within that place, they've probably done so at a particularly interesting time of day. So if there's no dusk shots of a particular thing, but lots of daytime shots, it probably looks rubbish at nighttime or dusk. You know, you can kind of do that. So you can have a look at the stands and then either buy lots of postcards, or sometimes I find that they do little mini calendars maybe, you know, so, you know, $5 gets you a little mini calendar, and now you've got 12 shots. Ooh, yeah, that's ready to go. So good question. Thanks for that. Anything else? We scare them off, Sam.
Well, I guess I'll just say thank you so much for doing this, and you got an amazing thing going here, and awesome skills to share with us. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for that. I've really enjoyed it. It's great practice for me, because this is where, as I said to you, this is where I'm going, and I need to be able to do all that.
Yeah,
This
is great. And I guess I would mention Dave's IOP online. Can you tell us where tell us all where to find you and how to follow your stuff?
Because I had prepared it, but I tend to be a very bad salesperson. If you so ioponline.com is where you'll find us, and I'm currently running a series of live Zoom courses over the summer, and if you go onto our website, you'll find them all. So there's one on Photoshop. In fact, there's 16 courses. There's even a calendar that you can see, and they're all on Saturdays or Sundays, and they're all at times that Pacific time right through to UK and Ireland and Central European time could possibly take as well. You'll also find us, we are posting lots of hints and tips up on our Instagram, and you'll find us at IOP Online is us on Flickr or on Instagram. We're also on YouTube, and I've got a really nice series of videos I've just uploaded about street photography. Now, there is a problem with street photography in Kansas, particularly small town Kansas. Street photography needs people walking on the streets. So it tends not to be as successful when there aren't people walking on the streets. And in 100-degree weather, people don't really want to walk on the streets. Great if you're thinking of going to the state fair. Fingers crossed that it can still go ahead. State fair is great for that. Farmers markets are great for street photography as well. So basically, there's a series of videos on setting up for street photography, setting your camera up, and what is it that you'd be looking at when you're doing that as well. Okay, and we're on Facebook as well. IOP or online IOP is that. But you'll catch us on our website. At the very bottom is all the social media areas that we're at. But do have a look at some of those courses. I've got one on Dusk. In fact, I've got a in August I've got street photography, and in July I've got dusk photography as well. But I've got quite a few others going on, landscape and so on, certainly in a few weeks. So thanks for that, Sam. I forget to pay my own bills sometimes, you know, just get too wrapped up in the photography.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, thanks a lot. We'll have to check that out, and just let us know when you're back in Kansas, back when travel's more possible again, and we can't wait to meet you in person sometime.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks.
Great. Listen,
Bye,
thanks a lot,
everybody.
guys. Okay. Talk to you all soon.
I'll just. Okay. Well, I stopped the live stream. I guess Dave left. So, all right. Well, thanks again, everybody. I'm going to close it out now. So see you all later.